our special guests and inductees, Christine Elliott, Jessica Phoenix, Jeff Warburton, and family members present on behalf of Dale Hawerchuk and everyone watching online. At the Durham District School Board, excellence is defined and celebrated in many ways, through graduation, through participation, and through the leadership our students demonstrate each and every day. As a community of leaders and learners, it is important that we take the time to acknowledge and celebrate excellence within our board. The 4 new inductees into the Definitely Durham Hall of Fame exemplify the Durham District School Board's character traits of teamwork, responsibility, respect, perseverance, optimism, kindness, integrity, honesty, empathy, and courage. That speaks volumes. They are positive role models for our students and our entire school community. These 4 individuals have achieved outstanding success in realizing their goals and are from all parts of Durham. We are extremely pleased and proud to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of 4 extraordinary individuals who have lived, who have learned within the walls of our great schools. We are proud to say that they are definitely Durham. I do regret that we are unable to celebrate in person. So please accept my virtual hugs and my virtual handshakes, and congratulations. This brings me to the time we have all been waiting for, to celebrate inspiration and excellence as we induct our honorees into our very own Hall of Fame, Definitely Durham. Trustee Thatcher, you are muted.
Thank you. My name is Christine Thatcher, and I'm one of the trustees for Whitby. I have the distinct honor of celebrating our first inductee, the Honorable Christine Elliott, Ontario Deputy Premier and Minister of Health. Please watch this presentation with me, highlighting Christine's career and accomplishments.
The Honorable Christine Elliott attended Dundas Street Public School, Colborne Street Public School, and graduated from Anderson CVI. Christine built a successful career in business and law, working first as an auditor at one of Canada's largest banks, before co-founding a law firm. She used her business and legal expertise to pursue a commitment to public service, where in 2006, she was first elected MPP for Whitby Ajax. Christine has been re-elected 4 more times, and her service to the people of Ontario at Queen's Park also has included being appointed as Ontario's first ever patient ombudsman, 6 years as deputy leader of the Ontario PC Party, and as the Minister of Health and Deputy Premier of Ontario.
Please join with me in congratulating Christine Elliott on her induction into the Definitely Durham Hall of Fame. I would like to invite Christine to provide a few remarks accepting this reward. Christine?
Well, good evening, everyone. And I'd like to start by thanking Chair Morton and Trustee Thatcher and all of the members of the Definitely Durham Selection Committee for including me and my fellow honorees for this recognition and great honor. I am a very proud graduate of a Durham District School Board schools from my start at Dundas Public School, going to Colborne Senior Public School, and then going to Anderson CVI in my graduation. And I have to say that every step along the way at every school, I was offered encouragement and encouragement to continue learning, to ask questions, to see the bigger picture. And I'll spare you of the details of what I learned in elementary school, but I do have some significant memories of my high school experience and what I learned there. And I learned to see the bigger picture, to push myself, to make sure I do the research on anything I did to do the job thoroughly and properly. And I learned so many more. So from my high school French teacher, I learned French, yes, which is a little bit rusty right now, but I also learned about French culture, about French food, about French Impressionist painters, and so on. I still have distinct memories of all that I learned there. From my geography teacher, I also learned about geography, yes, but about environmental issues, about global issues. And from my high school history teacher, I remember in my last year of school that we were encouraged to work on independent projects, both of present concern on past concerns. I did one of my projects on the stock market crash of 1929, and little did I know that that would be relevant to me many years later in 1987 when we had a second stock market crash as I was working for Scotiabank. So all of these things came together. But I learned so much substantively in high school, but so much more that has been of service to me in everything that I've done since then. So I'm very grateful for all that. I'm grateful for the amazing teachers that I had in both elementary and high school, and the huge impression that they made on me and how they helped me to do the work that I'm doing today. But finally, at the end of it, I also want to say that this has a great deal of meaning to me personally, because my entire family has spent years working for the Durham District School Board, starting with my father, John Elliott, who spent his entire career in administration and teaching for the Durham Board, as well as my sisters, Laura Elliott, Lee Elliott, and Jody Risto, who have served administratively, but also in both elementary and high school teaching at the Durham District School Board. So this has a great deal of meaning for me, and I want to thank you very, very much for including me in this award.
Trustee Crawford, are you there?
Yes, I am. I was just waiting for a cue. Thank you, Christine, and congratulations once again. My name is Paul Crawford, and I am one of the trustees for Pickering. I now have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing our next inductee, Jeff Warburton. Please join me in watching this presentation, highlighting Jeff's career and contributions.
Jeff Warburton is a songwriter from Pickering, Ontario. He attended Vaughan Willard Public School and graduated from Pine Ridge Secondary School. His love of music inspired him to learn the guitar as he frequently played alongside family members in church on Sunday mornings. During his years at university, Jeff was introduced to singer-songwriter Shawn Mendes. This led to a long-standing collaboration, and most notably, a couple of multi-platinum singles, one of which was nominated for Song of the Year at the 2019 Grammy Awards.
Please join me in congratulating Jeff Warburton on his induction into the Definitely Durham Hall of Fame. I would now like to invite Jeff to provide a few remarks accepting this reward.
Hello, everybody. Just wanted to say thank you to the Durham District School Board and the Definitely Durham Selection Committee for the induction. It's an honor to be recognized among these other amazing inductees and a privilege to have grown up attending both Vaughan Willard Public School and Pine Ridge Secondary School. Special thank you to my elementary school French teacher, Richard Mundridge, for the nomination as well. I've had so many supportive teachers and coaches over the years who have invested so much into my life, and I couldn't thank you enough. Again, thank you to all who have put this event together tonight and made it possible. And thank you to everybody for logging in tonight and joining in the fun. Appreciate the induction once again.
Thank you, Jeff, and congratulations. I now have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing the video presentation for our next inductee, Jessica Phoenix, highlighting her career and her contributions. On to Jessica.
Jessica Phoenix, née Ferguson, is a two-time Olympian and five-time Pan American medalist, equestrian mentor, coach, and inspirational public speaker. Jessica grew up in Uxbridge attending Joseph Gould Public School and graduated from Uxbridge Secondary School. In 1996, she first competed in equestrian competitions, achieving the champion Ontario training level atop her horse, Let's Boogie. She quickly moved on to competing nationally and internationally while being named to Canadian teams in several Olympics, World Equestrian Games, and Pan American Games. In her spare time, Jessica shares her inspirational story with students, teaching them the values of dedication and commitment to achieve one's dreams.
Please join me in congratulating Jessica Phoenix on her induction into the Definitely Durham Hall of Fame. Jessica, would you like to say a few words?
I would love to. Thank you guys so much for this incredible honor. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
These are amazing. Thank you so much for getting them to us in the mail. And wow, what an honor to be with this group of people here tonight. And thank you so much for the induction. To be able to grow up in Durham region and go to these incredible schools and to now watch my children going to the same incredible schools is just a dream come true. Also, my sister and I are able to do the RISE school tour in Durham region and speak to hundreds of students, and that has a great deal of meaning to me as well. So thank you guys so much for this honor, and I will definitely be sporting this in the barn next to all of our medals. And thank you guys. We love you, and go Durham region.
Thank you, Jessica. That was quite amazing, and congratulations once again. So my name is Darlene Forbes. I am one of the trustees from Oshawa, and I now have the honor and privilege of introducing the video presentation for our fourth and final inductee, Dale Hawerchuk, highlighting Dale's career and contributions. And I just had to let my entire family know that I was doing this tonight. Everyone was very excited. So thank you.
Dale Hawerchuk moved to Oshawa at an early age and attended Woodcrest Public School and Dr. F.J. Donovan, CI. Dale is one of Canada's hockey stars who demonstrated excellence on the ice during his 16-year NHL Hall of Fame career and exemplified greatness through his charity work. Dale was an inspiring leader, teacher, and builder with an unmatched commitment for helping others. He believed it was his responsibility and that of his family to do whatever they could to give back, never expecting acknowledgement in return. Sadly, Dale passed away in August 2020 after being diagnosed with cancer. But his activities and memory will live on forever.
So please join me in celebrating Dale Hawerchuk as an official inductee into the Definitely Durham Hall of Fame. And I would like to now invite Dale's sister, Dana, to provide a few remarks on accepting this award on Dale's behalf.
Good evening. Am I there? Hello?
Hello.
I can't see the video. Am I on there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So thank you for having me. I'd like to thank Stephanie and Greg for nominating Dale, as well as the Durham District School Board for selecting Dale among all these other deserving recipients. And congratulations to Jeff, Jessica, and Christine as well. As a former Durham District School Board attendee and proud sister, I am honored to accept this award on behalf of my brother, Dale. I'm sure Dale would have been very honored to receive this nomination, as he was very thrilled by the park being named after him. He did get that phone call and called Mom and Dad and I to let us know, because I went to the same school as him just 10 years later. I've always been very proud of my big brother, not just for his athletic skills, but as a human being. He's always been very family oriented, as well as thoughtful, kind, considerate. Outside of his talent, though, to be remembered as a kind, humble, and generous person, you can't ask for more than that. So just want to thank you for allowing me to accept this on his behalf.
Trustee Templeton, are you there?
There we go. Thank you, Dana. Please join me in congratulating all of our inductees for 2020. Please turn your attention to the screen to view the plaques that will be prominently featured on the Wall of Fame in the atrium outside our boardroom at the Education Center. Our Wall of Fame holds tributes to all of our inductees and offers a reminder to everyone who passes by of the possibilities for success in which we all share. To this year's inductees, we say thank you for raising the bar high and for providing us with examples and reminders of our collective goal that Durham District School Board students can and will meet the great future success. We pay tribute to you as outstanding role models for our students of today and into the future. Thank you to the individuals who took the time to nominate someone for our Hall of Fame. You presented the selection committee with a very difficult and unavoidable task of selecting from many excellent nominations. My last thank you is reserved for everyone watching at home. Thanks to each and every one of you for joining us here tonight. Your support of public education and our dedicated staff and our community of students is truly appreciated.
Again, my congratulations to our 4 new inductees, and I am sending you those virtual hugs and those virtual handshakes. Well done. Thank you. Moving on. Are there any community presentations? I will go to Director Marsh.
Thank you. I do believe there are some questions, and are they coming forward via video, John? I believe they were.
Yes, one moment.
All right.
Hi, Dylan, you're on now if you want to ask your questions.
All right, so my first question tonight is in relation to the school year calendar for 21-22. The winter break falls from December 20th to December 31st, but actually the date of January 1st falls on the Saturday, and even where the holiday falls this year, the return to school date currently is January 3rd. But would it be okay if you move the board designated holiday from March 11th, which is Friday, to January 3rd, and have students come back on the 4th? Or my second question is in relation to, with March break being postponed to April 12th to April 16th, how would that impact students in the DDSB, especially at the secondary level? And my last question, the third question is, will bell times at the secondary level return to their normal bell time from the 2019-20 year? That's it. That's the questions that I have tonight.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much,
Dylan.
Dylan.
Thank you, Dylan. Director Marsh, would you like to answer those 3 questions?
Thank you, through you, Chair Morton. Happy to answer those 3 questions, Dylan. The first question is related to next year's calendar. And in fact, we'll be doing a consultation process with community. And so certainly everyone's voice is welcome in the consultation process. That will be approved tonight in terms of us going out for consultation. So Associate Director Markowski is on the line, and I will just ask him to briefly identify what's in the current plan and understanding that if you want to give us feedback on that via the consultation process, you're more than welcome to. Associate Director Markowski.
Thank you, Director Marsh. And just to build on your comments, Dylan, I want to just thank you for bringing your questions forward.
You're welcome.
Usually the winter break is a 2-week period. And when a statutory holiday like New Year's Day falls on the weekend, it could actually be taken before the weekend or after. In situations like this, it's usually honored before the weekend happens. But that being said, we are going through a consultative process right now for the school year calendars, and we'll welcome input from the community in terms of how it is that we shape next year's calendar. So I want to thank you for bringing those comments forward.
You're welcome.
In terms of your second question related to the March break being postponed, we just found out about that the same time as the public in terms of last Thursday late afternoon. So we're still working through all the implications about what that will look like from a system perspective and for students. One of the things we do know is that the new vacation time, it doesn't really correspond with our quadmester when we did the planning around the quadmester system. So it does mean that students would be coming back for 2 days after the April, now what it will be the April break. So one of the things we're talking about, but it's in early stages right now, is the impact of the loss of March break on student well-being potentially, and their sense of energy and completing all of the work for their credits. And so we're wondering about the potential of possibly having 2 credit days, 2 credit completion days following that April break. Normally we would only have 1, but we had built in the idea of having the March break. So trying to accommodate the system around what the impact will be on students and student well-being. So there will be more information coming from your school principal once we've made some system decisions in relation to that, but very sensitive to the impact on students in terms of the changes that have been made. And in terms of your third question around bell times, we did bring forward a report about a month ago in terms of bell times for next year. And in that report, we planned to have them revert back more or less to what had been previously identified. But we also flagged in that report that as we work through, we know that things are evolving. There may be a report coming back to board at some point where we're adjusting some bell times and secondary schools might be impacted at that point, but we don't have that information yet.
Okay, so, and also another thing, like, for example, Pine Ridge Secondary, before the pandemic started, the start time was 8:10 a.m. And actually, another concern to that is that it means kids would be traveling to school more in the dark during the months of January and December, and sometimes October as well, when daylight October.
Really appreciate the feedback in terms of secondary bell times. And we know that, I think that for a lot of students, the 10 a.m. start has been somewhat popular in terms of sleeping habits. But we also know we've received a lot of feedback in terms of the end of the day and how that doesn't work as well, especially for those students who rely on extra income with part-time jobs. But certainly there will be more to come on that one, Dylan. Right now it's status quo of 8:10, but there may be changes.
Okay.
Thank you again for being here.
All right, bye guys.
Thank you, Dylan.
All right, I'm gonna stop my video here.
Are there any other questions or presentations? Seeing none, let's move to ministry memorandums, information update. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Morton. And with your indulgence, I would like to, before I identify some of the ministry memos that may be of interest to the trustees, did want to acknowledge certainly that today there was an accident at a school in the system at Julie Payette Public School. We immediately did have staff go out to provide support to the school community. 2 students were injured and 1 remains in hospital as a result of injuries. The school principal and school superintendent have been in contact with family members. We're certainly sending our prayers to the student and family, and our thoughts with the whole school community. And when we have more information to share, we certainly will do so. And just wanted to acknowledge that today in terms of our thoughts being with that school community and the family. In terms of ministry memos, I think our questions led us to some of the ones that have come out. So certainly last Thursday or last week, we received a memo in relation to the delaying of the March break. We have decided to go ahead as a district. We had a board holiday leading up to the March break. We have decided that the board holiday of Friday, March 12th will continue, but then we would resume classes the following week. We have been having conversations in terms of, as a system, how we mitigate any potential negative impact both on students and staff in terms of the delay of this vacation period. We know that for many people who have been struggling during the pandemic, one of their coping strategies is to chunk and to think about chunking time in terms of being able to get through certain periods. And so the delay of a month can have a potential ripple impact in terms of people's coping strategies, and also recognizing at the secondary level that assessment planning was done with the intent that there would be that week off in terms of students rejuvenating. So there will be more to come as we work through with school communities in terms of what the impact and strategies will be in terms of really trying to focus. We've said from the very beginning that our focus throughout this period had to be well-being at the beginning. And so we're approaching this news with a focus on how we'll support well-being throughout the district. The modified calendar, for those families who are in the modified elementary program, we flagged for the ministry immediately that their holiday time was different and that it was a very small group within Durham that would be impacted by if they were to go ahead with the scheduled modified calendar. We have not received permission from the Ministry of Education in terms of the calendar that they could go ahead and proceed with the modified calendar plan, nor have we received direction that they should move it to April. So we have been in regular communication, daily communication in terms of seeking that response, recognizing that for families and staff, it's important that they get an answer as soon as possible. We also have received a memo from the Ministry of Education providing the opportunity for us to be able to use teacher candidates who are in a practicum in a school within Durham District School Board. We now have the opportunity when they're on practicum, if there happens to be a shortage of staff on that particular day, and you we all recognize that during this pandemic period, we have had shortages of staff where we've been having to reallocate other staff to cover off classrooms. And so they have changed the policy so that we can now employ teacher candidates as occasional teachers on an emergency basis should there be no qualified occasional teachers available to provide the duties and supervision. So we'll continue to monitor that situation and see how it progresses. We also received the memo in relation to federal safe return funding. And so I'm going to actually ask Associate Director Wright just to walk trustees through a little bit of the content of that memo and the implications for Durham District School Board.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Through you, Chair. Memo B1 was released on February 1st, highlighting the release of the second half of the federal government's Safe Return to Class Fund, the second half being $381 million. The entirety of the $381 million has been addressed, though not entirely allocated, similar to the first half of the federal safe return to school funds. Approximately $6.5 million has been earmarked for Durham District School Board, slightly less than the first round, though again, not all of the money is entirely allocated, and so Durham's share will increase over time as the ministry announces how the remainder of the funds will be spent. Specifically, about $1.5 million has been allocated to Durham District School Board to improve ventilation and air quality, $2.25 million for health and safety, $112,000 for transportation, and $2.8 million to support technology. This money needs to be committed by March 31st. The intention is that the money is to be spent on a go-forward basis. So new funding, new spend, and needs to be spent by the end of our school year, August 31st, 2021. We will be bringing a report forward to trustees in the future highlighting the impact of this funding on our operations. Thank you.
Chair Morton, we're happy to take any questions should there be any.
Are there questions? Seeing none, I thank both of you for those reports. Oh, I do see hands now. I will go to Trustee Lundquist and then Trustee Edwards.
I'm going to defer to Trustee Edwards because she had her hand up long before I did.
Okay, Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. I just a comment around technology, and we're supposed to have the funds spent by August. However, especially when it comes to the backlog, etc., will there be an issue? As long as there's a purchase order out there, we'll still be able to receive and accept those funds, basically, or will we have an issue?
Through you, Chair, I think that's an excellent question. We've heard lots about the global shortage of Chromebooks. The Ministry of Education is working with the Ministry of Consumer and Government Services, as well as some procurement organizations like OECM, to bulk procure devices. So in terms of province, not everybody uses Chromebooks. There are laptops, there are iPads, etc. And so I think the government is working on a procurement strategy to ensure devices are available if required through central procurement. I think we're in a favorable position at Durham District that we have available the devices that we use for our one-to-one Chromebook deployment and school-based devices relatively available through our vendor. They're starting to come online now. So I think we're in a good position. We're working with our IT department to come up with a comprehensive spend plan. But specifically for us, we're comfortable that we're going to be able to utilize the money effectively. Thanks.
Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So that was partly my question was about the expenditures for technology in light of the challenges that we have. So I appreciate that from Trustee Edwards. And then the second part of my question is a twofold, I guess. So the money that is allocated for ventilation, I presume that that's mostly filter systems, like we're just getting better filters. Am I wrong about that? I'm getting a lot of questions from parents about this, so I'm just trying to understand the extent of the ventilation work that is being done, because I think parents are expecting it to be more visible perhaps than it is. And so I just want to have a sense of that so that we can provide an answer if we may.
Again, through you, Chair. It is an evolving situation as we investigate more of the capabilities of our HVAC systems. So we plan to do a few things with the money, contingent on approval for spend. Certainly some of it will go to filtration. So there's a lot of talk about HEPA filters and MERV filters. So MERV is a standard of filtration, and MERV filters go from 7, 8, 9, 10 up to 12. The higher the number, the smaller the micron particle that the filter will stop. HEPA being the most dense filter and will stop the smallest particles from going through. Unfortunately, when school heating and ventilation systems were installed, they really weren't installed with HEPA filters in mind. And so the units aren't designed to push air through that level of filtration. So we are able to install MERV 13 filters, which is a significantly higher level of filtration than what our normal standard would have been, probably around MERV 7. And they are fairly expensive. So I think it's about $600,000 for our board to put MERV 13 filters in all of our HVAC systems across the board, which is about 3 times the cost of what our traditional filters would have been. So we anticipate some of that ventilation air quality money will go to purchase filters. We're also going to be doing some duct cleaning, ensuring that we remove particulate out of our HVAC systems to ensure unobstructed airflow. And we do intend on purchasing a few classroom-based HEPA filter-based air purifiers. So we do have about 150 in the system right now. We are looking at purchasing more that will go into areas where the ventilation is not as great. So we do have a few facilities that don't have full mechanical ventilation and need a little support. Portables being a good example. And so we're going to do a few things with the money, but they all should be a pretty good bang for the buck, so to speak. But I get your point about stakeholders not seeing the visible effects of our improvements to air quality just by the nature of what they are. Hopefully that answers your question. Anything else? I'm trying to answer that for you.
It did answer my question in far greater detail than I would have anticipated, and I appreciate it very much, actually. Because I bet you never thought you would be at this board meeting talking about air filters and microns ever. So I appreciate that. And then if I may, Chair Morton, I just have a supplemental question about the expenditure. So the other piece of that I'm wondering about is, so there was a significant amount of money allocated to health and safety, but no indication of what kind of, and I recognize we're going to get a report later on, but I get a lot of calls from parents asking about the things we're doing. So if those are staff things in terms of masking or sanitizers or wipes or those kinds of things, I completely understand why we'd be spending that. I'm just wondering if any of that money is being allocated in terms of student safety.
Yeah, I would suggest that that our PPE and cleaning supplies really are targeted at student safety as much as they are at staff safety, all in the intent of stopping the transmission of COVID-19. So I can't say specifically that we'll be purchasing PPE or supplies for students, but certainly for the system. The intention of the health and safety money is to offset the cost of PPE and critical supplies that aren't currently covered through the ministries and the Government of Ontario central procurement through MGCS. So again, through facility services and health and safety, we're working on a plan for an effective spend of that money.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to ask a loaded question, and I recognized as soon as it came out that I made it sound as though, it's one or the other, and I recognize that clean, safe schools impact everybody. So I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Thank you, Associate Director Wright. Seeing no other questions, we will move on. I'm just double checking to make sure that there are no other questions for the public question period.
There are not, Chair Morton. Thank you for checking.
Thank you. Moving on to presentations, our student census data, a very interesting report. I'll go back to Director Marsh.
Thank you, through you, Chair Morton. Before I turn it over to the leads in terms of this work district-wide, wanted to take the opportunity to publicly thank families and communities who've made this work possible for the Durham District School Board. We recognize that participating in our census survey was an important step and an acknowledgement of trusting the system enough to self-identify. So we very much appreciate the trust that has been shown to us. We're several districts within the province of Ontario who have pursued this work. And my understanding is that in the next year, there will be 52 more following. So we're certainly leading the way in terms of using this census data to inform systemic change within the Durham District School Board. This data really does hold us publicly responsible to students and their families. And we need to recognize that this is a call to action in terms of analyzing the census data so that as a system, we acknowledge that change needs to occur and that within our system, we need to ensure anti-oppressive and equity practices throughout in every single classroom for every single experience. And so I'm really understanding of that we're at the beginning of the journey in terms of a lot of needed change, but also want to acknowledge and appreciate the team's work as they'll unpack it shortly, but also the families and community who really did support sensitive collection of this data. Thank you. I'll turn it over to, I believe, Superintendent Hamid is leading the way.
Thank you, Director Marsh. And through you, Chair, the report can be found on page 29 of your package. Once again, I'm thrilled to be here with the development team to present the first public analysis of our student census. And I'll turn it over to Jackie Steer to get us started.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce the members of the DDSB Student Census Development Team. These are the members of the team: Jennifer Hudson, Michelle Evans, Jackie Steer, Crystal Bryan, Camille Ali, Holly Richard, Meryl Matthews, Chanel Mitchell, Chris Conley, Denise Nickerson, Thevika Mathur, Erin Helmhurst, Margaret Lazarus, and Superintendent Mohammed Hamid. And I think I've missed. Okay. I'm having trouble reading the screen. I'm wondering if you could reduce it a little for me, because I'm seeing faces on the side, so I'm missing some of the text. Is it possible to reduce that?
I can read it, Jackie, if you'd like.
I will go ahead and I will try. The Durham District School Board recognizes that reconciliation requires, I'm going to see if I can, constructive action on addressing the ongoing legacies of colonialism that have had destructive impacts on Indigenous peoples, education, languages, cultures, and languages. Truth and Reconciliation Commission booklet, page 8. These ongoing legacies of colonialism continue to affect the dignity, innocence, and grace of Indigenous peoples. The DDSB confirms its commitment to reconciliation.
The Durham District School Board also recognizes that Indigenous rights are distinct, and in the exercise of those rights, Indigenous staff and students shall not be subjected to actions with the aim or the effect of depriving these distinct rights. This is based on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action, which speaks to inherent Indigenous rights and to principles, practices, and actions to provide and enhance culturally relevant and responsive educational services, experiences, and outcomes for Indigenous students free from discrimination. The Durham District School Board is also committed to learning and working environments that center human rights and equity and that are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination. This means that we are committed to actively identifying, preventing, and addressing discriminatory and disproportionate barriers, experiences, and outcomes for students. Next slide. Requirements to identify, prevent, and address barriers for human rights code protected groups are set out in legislation such as the Human Rights Code, the Anti-Racism Act, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, as well as in Ministry of Education policies. These laws set out various rights as well as duties, responsibilities, and obligations. And when we think about that in our context as an education service provider, students are rights holders. And as a service provider, we are duty bearers. This slide shows the relationship between rights holders and duty bearers. And as rights holders, students have the right to receive educational services without discrimination based on any of the Human Rights Code grounds. Students have equal rights. They have the right to be treated with dignity and respect, and they have the right to equitable educational opportunities, experiences, and outcomes. And as an education service provider, we are duty bearers. We all have duties, responsibilities, and obligations to support, promote, and protect human rights, to provide welcoming, safe, respectful, accessible, and inclusive environments, and to treat everyone with dignity and respect. We have a duty to identify, prevent, and address educational barriers and discrimination that may affect students' rights. We often think of this duty as the duty to accommodate or to address complaints. And while that's true, and it's certainly part of our obligations, we also have a positive duty to uphold, protect, and promote students' rights and to prevent and address barriers. And one way to do that is to identify barriers through data collection and analysis. And the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the Anti-Racism Directorate provincially both stress the importance of collecting data to help identify and address systemic barriers. And more specifically, numerical data that shows that some groups are disproportionately over or underrepresented in certain areas may indicate that there are systemic barriers. And that data can then be used to help identify barriers, take action to address them, and promote equitable outcomes. So we have all of these legal duty bearer responsibilities, but it's also the right thing to do.
So why do a census? Federal and government grants and supports to communities are based on population totals and break down by a myriad of factors. Business use census data to decide where to build factories, offices, stores. This creates jobs. Developers use census data to build new homes and revitalize old neighborhoods. Local governments use the census data for public safety and emergency preparedness. Residents use census data to support community initiatives. In summary, why do a census? To make changes that will benefit a community. Along the same lines, this is no different for a student census. A student census helps us as a board to gain a clearer understanding of who our students are, as well as who is achieving and who is not achieving. The census data will help us to put in supports to support equity, student achievement, and well-being for all. Next slide, please. Systemic barriers are system-wide realities that prevent some people from meeting their potential in a given system. They are often unintentional and even invisible to those who are not impacted by them. Some examples of systemic barriers would be when we had the quick transition to distance learning last March, it created a barrier for those that didn't have internet access. Prior to the designation of the gender-neutral washrooms across the DDSB, trans and non-binary students and staff faced a barrier, specifically safety, every time they wanted to use a washroom. I specifically recall a student who left school halfway through the afternoon every day to go home to use the bathroom. And due to the distance where they lived, they often missed a whole period of class. This led to their underachievement in some of their afternoon classes. Another systemic barrier is found in the choice of curriculum resources that support a single story narrative, which often excludes or denigrates the lived realities and experiences of many of our students. If too little is done to both prevent and respond to incidences involving racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, etc., then those who are at most impacted will face ongoing barriers to feeling safe, welcome, and included. This will have a direct impact on their ability to thrive in school. Thus, this slide shows our statement of principles. I wasn't going to read the slide, sorry.
While the student census provided us with a strong base of actionable data, we would like to stress that the census was not able to capture data relating to all identities and experiences that might impact student opportunities to thrive at school by virtue of systemic barriers. All types of data collection will have limitations, and we will work to progressively minimize these limitations going forward by A, working to improve census participation in future collection years, and B, by bolstering the student census data with other forms of data. We know that there are many more ways that students are marginalized within our system. Disproportionalities in these and other outcomes, as well as in student experiences, are due to systemic biases and practices that disadvantage racialized, Indigenous, and 2S LGBTQ+ students, but also students who are living in poverty, students who are differently abled, students who have experienced trauma or other adverse experiences, students whose religious beliefs are minoritized, etc. We also know that many DDSB students hold many of these layers of identity and experience. Effective system interventions will require us to consider as many layers as possible. This data is therefore a point of departure, a signal of where we need to go.
The following analysis of selected academic achievement from 2018 to 2019 is presented for the following identities. Racial identity includes students who identify as Black, South Asian, and white. Religious identity includes students who identify as Christian, Muslim, or no religion. Sexual orientation identity includes students who identify as straight and 2S LGBTQ+. But what about the other identities? In the legislation, Data Standard 27 outlines the scope of analysis with a focus on racial, religious identities. This does not limit us to only analyzing these identities, but it is our initial focus. Expanded analysis will continue to be developed and shared. These identities have been selected for analysis because they had the largest responses, which provide us with the opportunity to fully explore the academic data sets with minimal suppression of data. We have also selected these identities because we have had requests in the past to analyze the student outcomes, but did not have the data to be able to respond to the questions and requests. Although legislation addresses racial identity, we are exploring the data from other identity lenses. We have a suppression rule applied, much like EQAO. This means that when we have results for fewer than 15 students, the information is withheld to protect students' identity. Next slide. Although there were low numbers of students who identified as Indigenous, it is important to note that additional analysis is being conducted to be able to compensate for those low numbers, which will make the barriers more visible. However, our preliminary analysis in combination with provincial data and local self-identity data does highlight that there are barriers for Indigenous students. This must be a key consideration within our action planning. Historically, reporting of student achievement has included outcomes for students with an IEP. Given that there's been some historical reporting in the past, priority was placed on race, religion, and orientation for this preliminary analysis. Although disability identities are not included as summaries, we have included the intersection of racial and religious identity and students who have IEPs. The following slides provide a big picture overview of the trends that have emerged from these analyses.
This graph presents the percentage of grade 8 students that have achieved at levels 3 and 4 in literacy on the left and numeracy on the right. I would like to recall that the participation rate for the student census for kindergarten to grade 6 was 30%, and the rate for students in grades 7 to 12 was 46%. Each bar represents racial, religious, and orientation identities. The dotted lines represent the percentage for all grade 8 students who participated in the student census. As you can see, On the left in literacy, the highest outcome is 92%, and the lowest outcome is 78%. The difference between these 2 points is 14%. On the right, in numeracy, the highest outcome is 87%, and the lowest outcome is 70%. The difference between these 2 points is 17%. This data shows that our system imposes barriers that disproportionately and negatively affect students who identify as Black and, although not displayed here, students who identify as Indigenous. This graph presents the percentage of grade 12 students that have achieved 70% or higher in University English on the left and University Math on the right. Again, I would like to recall that the participation rate for student census for students in grades 7 to 12 was 46%. Each bar represents racial, religious orientation identities included in our analysis. The dotted lines represent the percentage for all grade 12 students who participated in the student census. As you can see, on the left in grade 12 University English, the highest outcome is 83%, and the lowest outcome is 70%. The difference between these 2 points is 13%. On the right, in grade 12 University Math, the highest outcome is 74%, and the lowest outcome is 62%. The difference between these 2 points is 12%. This data shows that our system imposes barriers that disproportionately and negatively affect students who identify as Black and, although not displayed here, students who identify as Indigenous. This graph presents the percentage of grade 12 students that achieve 70% or higher in college English on the left and college math on the right. The dotted lines represent the percentage for all grade 12 students who participate in the student census. In this case, 56% students achieved 70% or higher in college English and college math. Please note that the South Asian identity is omitted due to a low sample size of this group for analysis. As you can see, on the left in grade 12 college English, the highest outcome is 61%, and the lowest outcome is 47%. The difference between these 2 points is 14%. On the right, in grade 12 college math, the highest outcome is 70%, and the lowest outcome is 41%. The difference between these 2 points is 29%. This data shows that our system imposes barriers that disproportionately and negatively affect students who identify as Black and, although not displayed here, students who identify as Indigenous.
These graphs show the percentage of students who have been suspended summarized by racial identity in dark green on the left, and the percentage of students who responded to the student census by racial identity in light green on the right. As you can see, students who identify as white have equivalent proportions of suspensions, 48%, as compared with their representation in the student census, 49%. Students who identify as South Asian have lower proportions of suspensions, 5%, as compared with their representation in the student census, 17%. Students who identify as Black have higher proportions of suspensions, 19%, as compared with their representation in the student census, 9%. This graph presents the percentage of students who graduated in 4 years on the left and the percentage of students who confirmed in an Ontario university on the right, number of confirmations divided by the number of applications. As you can see, on the left in 4-year graduation, the highest outcome is 95% and the lowest outcome is 85%. The difference between these 2 points is 10%. On the right, in Ontario University confirmation, the highest outcome is 87% and the lowest outcome is 80%. The difference between these 2 points is 7%.
This graph presents the percentage of students in grades 1 to 8 that have an individual education plan, or IEP, and participated in the student census. Each bar represents racial, religious, and orientation identities. The dotted line represents a percentage for all grade 1 to 8 students who participated in the student census. In this case, it is 17%. Please note that for 2S LGBTQ+ and straight orientations, results are based on students in grades 7 and 8 only, as a question around sexual orientation was asked of students in grades 7 and 8 in the student census, and not students in lower grades. As you can see, the greatest proportion of students is 28% for students who selected a 2S LGBTQ+ orientation, and the lowest proportion of students is 10% for students who selected South Asian as part of their identity. The difference between these 2 points is 18%. This graph presents the percentage of students in grades 1 to 8 that were enrolled in French immersion. Again, this sample is based on those who participated in the student census. Each bar represents racial, religious, and orientation identities. The dotted line represents the percentage of all grade 1 to 8 students who participated in the student census. In this case, it is 17%. Again, please note that for 2S LGBTQ+ and straight orientations, the results are based on students in grade 7 and 8 only. As you can see, the greatest proportion of students is 23% for students who selected Black as part of their identity, and the lowest proportion of students is 8% for students who selected straight as part of their identity. The difference between these 2 points is 15%.
So how are we honoring the trust that our students and families have placed in us? Next slide, please. The student census helps us better understand who it is that we serve in our schools. It also helps us to begin to recenter priority on human rights and well-being in service of learning, achievement, and engagement. And finally, it reminds us that structural justice must occur through concrete methods that give a solid foundation to consciousness raising. And with that, what are our commitments to honor that? Next slide, please. Our commitments are the following. We commit to being transparent about our data collection. We commit to the essential role that ongoing knowledge building with community plays in informing our work. We commit to exploring innovative practices and Indigenous knowledge systems, culturally responsive and relevant pedagogies and practices that will enable our students to thrive. We commit to intentionally focusing efforts in supporting and reaching every student. And we commit to identifying and addressing systemic barriers or discriminatory practices imposed upon students by virtue of the intersection of their identities and lived experiences. Next slide, please. So now we begin our process of reporting back to the community and honoring the trust that was given to us. And we know that this needs to happen together. Our commitments are that we are starting with the community priorities and the needs of the community. We are setting these consultations and engagements in good faith as steps to build trust. We are seeking to gain advice from community on what we are missing in the data. We are seeking to continue to build a commitment to transparency about our data collection and engage community voice in the identification and addressing of all systemic barriers and discriminatory practices imposed on our students. We will do that through sharing more fulsome reports on attendance, student achievement, programming, pathway selection, suspension, graduation. Next slide, please. As we prepare for the launch of our Student Census 2.0 in the fall, we recognize that our learning tells us there are 4 areas of non-participation: availability, access, awareness, and trust. And the goal being to use the community engagement sessions to increase participation by providing as much information to the community through responsive and relevant methods to support community questions around the first 3 points, and to begin the process of trust building. Next slide, please.
The model of support that we engage in as an equity and inclusive education department is one that involves knowledge building, coaching and mentoring, and job embedded learning. The essential knowledge building in our system requires looking at systems of oppression and how they are operating as barriers to thriving for our students. As a system, we are constantly learning and inquiring about how to support and think critically about our interactions with the education system so that all students are able to thrive and reach their highest potential. Important to note is that the model is nonlinear, and we are aware that we cannot stay in the knowledge building phase for too long before we move ahead. It's about continually learning, moving forward, measuring for impact, and going back to rethink the areas where we see gaps in the ways that we are serving. When we begin to have an understanding of how systems of oppression operate and are reproduced through some of our own actions, either intentionally or unintentionally, we can address them and begin to shift our policies, procedures, and practices. In the DDSB, we are using a framework of culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, which offers us many entry points to do the work that is anti-oppressive. For example, we use the philosophy of nothing about us without us, and therefore we are constantly asking ourselves questions such as, whose voices need to be at the table in each of these stages of implementation? Our work in CRP is at the personal, instructional, and institutional level. And here on this slide, you can see some of the institutional changes that are soon to be or already in place that are removing barriers to well-being for achievement for students. So on this slide, you can see under concrete systemic changes, we've listed Indigenous education policy, human rights policy, dress code policy, bias-aware positive school climate policy, the CRP anti-oppression strategy, as well as the compendium of action for Black student success.
The DDSB has already been working to place human rights at the center of everything we do. These 4 interconnected priorities represent the means by which this commitment may be honored in our schools. These are the essential features of thriving learning spaces. As we think about next steps, it's essential that we remain grounded in these priorities because the evidence tells us we must. Educational research over the past 10 years has completely upended the way we have historically understood priorities in public education. And this is why we've begun to see a shift in language, policy, and practice from the ministry to the classroom. From this research, we know that prioritizing academic achievement over these factors was essentially backwards. Instead, if we want all students to thrive at school, we must first invest in the development of a positive school climate. This requires investment in relationships, equity, and well-being. From this research, we now understand that well-being is essential to both learning and engagement. When we are holistically well, our brain is primed for thinking and learning, but also for the other processes necessary for being at our best in the classroom, including patience, focus, emotional regulation, empathy, and social connection. We also know that equity in the classroom is essential to well-being and engagement. Do all students see themselves and their worldviews reflected in curriculum and in teaching methods? Are we designing lessons and assessments that are relevant to our students and to the world around them? Finally, we know that relationships and community building play an essential role in both equity and well-being. According to experts like Dr. Jean Clinton, classrooms in which relationships are the priority tend to be places in which everyone feels safer, calmer, more engaged, and ready to learn. When things go wrong in school or in our students' lives, relationships are the #1 protective factor against the most negative impacts of those events. No matter what is happening, The research tells us that one teacher can make a significant difference in a child's life. And how relevant is that in the current moment? In various educator workshops this year, we have been framing this research as our permission to truly place our humanity and the humanity of our students at the center of our practice. Humanizing education is an essential step toward erasing the disproportionalities highlighted by this student census data. This is the why, and now it's our job to figure out the what. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is our report, and we are happy to answer any questions.
That was a very informative report, and I thank you, an amazing team, for that report. And we do have some hands up. The first one would be Trustee Forbes, and followed by Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Morton, and thank you to the team for this. I was just wondering, in terms of the overall participation rate, I thank you for including the information about the other boards and our rate of participation. And I know that this is as Superintendent Hamid has mentioned in the past, this is also a trust building. It takes time to build trust and with our community, to our schools, our parents, our families, our students, to trust that we're going to do something with the information they give us. So, but I was wondering, in terms of the other school boards, is there any sharing of best practices for boosting engagement in the census?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, the superintendents responsible for equity are part of a provincial collective. And we do meet monthly to discuss as you mentioned, Trustee Forbes, some of the learning that we've had. As Director Marsh mentioned, 32 boards have gone through the census. A number of more are joining us. So definitely there's some knowledge sharing around practices that have been working, and we are benefiting from the collective knowledge.
Thank you.
Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So I would like to start with the positive of this that I see, which is, I think this idea of understanding relationships and equity and well-being as a basis for student learning is really important, because I actually feel sometimes like the education system itself is a barrier to all of those things, just because of its very traditional structure. So I like the positioning of it in that respect. I am going to say I struggled a little bit with the presentation, and I struggled with it because it may be because there's a lower participation rate than we would like or need, but to me it isn't useful to have race and religion data on the same thing when that's overlapping and intersecting, and it doesn't mean anything to me when I see it that way. Like sometimes when data is parsed in that way, it just doesn't, I don't know, I couldn't actually appreciate, like, other than you telling me what the subtraction marks are, which I can do on my own. I don't actually understand why we would put data like that, because I don't think it clarifies anything for people. I think it's actually confusing, and it was to me at least. So that's really more just an observation in terms of, if we're going to provide data on which we're going to base our understandings, I think it's helpful to have charts that reflect those understandings. And I'm like, I puzzled over this report for a little bit because I was struggling with some of the structure, and I'm struggling because I think this is super important, right? Like, I think this work is vital, and I think that all of the things that were said about, finding the greatest disproportionality so that you can actually engage in meaningful things is really important. But I do want to say two things. So I recognize that, and I'm going to be really fast, Carolyn, I promise. I recognize that there are two things that I am always kind of flagging, and I know that this report is kind of preliminary. It's an unusual year. We have the data points we have, and I get that. But it does worry me when I see things that say, you know, something to the effect of the data point we're using in terms of disability is success with an IEP. Because there's so much more than that that needs to be looked at in terms of equity in a classroom. If we're talking about inclusion and relationships, to me, there's a significant gap there when we know what that impact is on students with special needs. So I worry about that and how we can actually get more data on that, because to me, we won't be able to create equitable learning if we can't provide all students with those relationships and the well-being elements of it. So that was a part of it for me that I thought was important. And then the other piece that I just wanted to say thank you about was there's not a lot in it, but I do think this piece on poverty is something that kind of gets quietly swept to the side, and it's really important. And I'm going to just provide an example that's kind of personal. So, and I think I've spoken about this once before, and I'm going to just do it again quickly because this really matters for kids who can't connect to curriculum and what's happening. So if I'm going to learn about budgeting, for example, you know, you might need to teach me that if I have $80 a month to buy groceries, how am I going to make that work? As opposed to what am I going to invest in the stock market? So like this very idea that poverty is not front and central in this discussion, to me, would be a lost piece, because it changes everything and it crosses all of those intersections, as we know. And so I was glad to hear you reference it, Superintendent Hamid. I would like to see us really pull that back in and weave it through, because I just think it has such a profound impact on communities of every kind that we're looking at trying to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Superintendent Hamid, did you want to respond?
No, I do concur, Trustee Lundquist, with that. And that is something that we absolutely talk about a lot, is the intersection that poverty, the effects of it. So echoing your concern and hoping that we continue to provide you with the necessary information to honor that concern, because we agree it's definitely something of great importance.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards, you have a question?
Thank you. It's more of a comment and somewhat of a question, but to sort of a little bit further on Trustee Lundquist's point, in that we have other data points that we do collect, and that we do know that students with disabilities, students in poverty have learning challenges as well. So we already know that. And the one of my comments is that, you know, we're looking at board actions, and I'm glad that we're looking and we're talking to other boards about how they improve response rates and so forth. But on page, I think it's page 33, you talk about interweaving as far as some of the action plans and other plans. And the one plan that isn't mentioned there is accessibility. And that shows me that because it was missed, it still seems like accessibility is treated as physical. And it might be just an oversight, but it's that oversight that causes issues around, because accessibility is not just about physical, and it's about the access to services, the ability to be able to even access these services, and it's not around physical. So I really just want to ensure that when you talk about interweaving, that you really look at all the data points, not just what we have around the student survey, because we already have these other data points, and ensuring that when we're developing our plans to look at the intersectionality of those data points and ensure we're addressing those in our plans. So accessibility plans should be included in there as well, and it's missed.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards, for those comments. We have Trustee Barnes who has a question.
Thank you. I just have a brief comment. I just wanted to thank Superintendent Hamid and the team for the presentation. I think the conversations about relationships is very important. The fact that we've made a very public and commitment around this piece, I think it will go a long way as well to build community trust and probably increase our engagement from our community and families. And so I look forward to seeing the update of the community consultations. And I wanted to thank you for putting the information forward.
Thank you. I also want to say to this committee that we are all in agreement that we need to gain a clearer understanding of who our students are in order to support equity, student achievement, and well-being. So thank you to this team. We certainly appreciate all the work that you've done. Moving on. We have a strategy update, anti-Black racism, and we're eager to hear from Superintendents Hamid and Lazarus.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The report can be found on pages 50 through to 55 of your board package. The purpose of this report is to provide trustees with an update on the work the DDSB is doing as part of its ongoing strategy to address the dismantling of anti-Black racism. Our work, as always, is centered on students and the communities that we serve, as we just heard in our presentation on the student census. We are committed to establishing real and sustainable change through the building of relationships that address system issues and promotes community voice. So please join me in welcoming tonight Jackie Steer, Crystal Bryan, Meryl Matthews, and Camille Ali, our members of our equity team, and Leah Franklin and Jeffrey DiCarlo, administrators, who will highlight several of the initiatives that are underway and the impact that our responsive approach is having on staff and on our students. So welcome, and I will turn the floor over to Meryl.
So in our work to dismantle to eliminate anti-Black racism across the system, we're committed to ensuring that human rights is at the heart of the work that we do, and that students receive an education that is free from discrimination and prejudice and that allows them to flourish and succeed. This commitment to ensuring human rights extends not only to our students, but also to DDSB staff and to stakeholders. The board's committed, the DDSB is committed to implementing actions outlined in the Compendium of Action for Black Student Success, and we've been working on that for quite a few years now. And that the Equity Department is currently working with renowned educator, Dr. Nicole Westburns. Dr. Westburns is known across the province for her work and expertise in the field of equity. The work being done by the Equity Department is responsive to issues identified in the census data and seeks to ensure equitable outcomes for all our students. Tonight, we will hear about the work that's being done. We'll hear from two of our school leaders about how they've experienced and been impacted by the work of Dr. Nicole Westburns, and also developing their understanding of anti-Black racism and its impact. Next slide, please. Meryl, I think.
Thank you, Jackie. Good evening, everybody. As Jackie mentioned, we're working in partnership with Dr. Nicole Westburns, a professional development consultant who has worked with educators from several boards across Ontario. And the foundational knowledge building sessions with Dr. Westburns are preparing educators and administrators to disrupt and dismantle anti-Black racism by deepening their understanding in the areas of Black Canadian history and the systemic barriers that exist, and understanding that participants also explore their experience with race and racism and develop a plan of action to disrupt and dismantle anti-Black racism within the sphere of their influence in their unique environments. So far, we've had teachers at the DDSB at home elementary and secondary campuses. We've had facilitators, managers, the Inclusive Student Services team, all administrators and superintendents are all participating in this professional learning series. Along with this work is a cohort project. That will be a series of professional learning sessions to support the implementation of culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy with a cohort of 18 bricks and mortar school teams from each of the family of schools and school teams also from our DDSB at home elementary and secondary to understand and to disrupt and dismantle anti-Black racism within their schools. Through the 6 sessions, school teams will be engaged in inquiries that will ask them to reflect on and challenge their thinking and practice so they can make meaningful changes that will positively impact Black students in the DDSB. Next slide, please. All of the professional learning opportunities we have shared are supported through our model of knowledge building, coaching, mentoring, and job embedded learning. At this time, we'd like to welcome Jeff DiCarlo, Vice Principal with the DDSB at home grade 7-8 campus, as he shares the impact of our session with Dr. Wes Burns. And I'm hoping Jeff is on because I think he may have been booted out, but hopefully he's back in.
Meryl, if he's not there, we could jump to Leah and then come back.
That's a great idea,
Just
Crystal.
have to go ahead in the
so much.
slides.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so this year, all of the administrators in the DDSB have been doing a book club, a book talk, and it has centered around the book by Robin DiAngelo called White Fragility. So I'm now going to turn it over to Leah Franklin, who is the one of the vice principals at Durham Alternative Secondary School, to share her personal reflection.
Thanks, Crystal. So the first slide that we have up here is just a really impactful quote that I wanted to share with you just before I reflect. It's at the start of chapter 4, how does race shape the lives of white people? White people, I don't want you to understand me better. I want you to understand yourselves. Your survival has never depended on your knowledge of white culture. In fact, it's required your ignorance. And this quote is by Ijoma Iluo. And it really speaks to the reflection that I'd like to share with you today. So I would like to speak to White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And the first significant reflection is that I found this book difficult to read. I took many breaks while reading it. It was difficult to read because it brought to light my blindness to privilege, bias, racism, and how this blindness is what actually feeds systemic racism. 2 key messages from DiAngelo that resonated with me were the following. First, I grew up in a mostly white community. My neighborhood, schools, camp, doctor, the books I read, sports teams I played on, etc., were almost entirely white. What this lived experience continually communicated to me was that I belonged. I belonged in all the spaces, and I could see myself. DiAngelo in her book ensured I recognized the opposite message was also being communicated. The races that were missing must not belong. For a long time, I have believed there was no racism in my upbringing. However, it is now very clear to me that the overt white supremacy style of racism is not the only racism that exists. In fact, in most of the racism around me was covert, ubiquitous, and insidious. Secondly, the myth of meritocracy and how it permits, allows, and excuses racism. I was taught, for example, hard work would ensure all my dreams would come true and that my achievements were deserved. Again, the danger of this belief suggests the opposite must be true. People do not have university degrees, careers, cars, etc. equates to them not being hardworking. It implies they must not deserve these things. The construct of meritocracy, once again, allows racism to exist. Reading this book for me made it abundantly clear that systemic racism is a truth and exists. I cannot and will not spend any time debating this fact. I will no longer be susceptible to this blindness. Moving forward, I must seek to understand different perspectives and lived experiences, question more, accept feedback, and be responsible for my impact. Finally, as a leader at the Durham District School Board, I hope and how I model receiving feedback will transfer to my school community. As I become more critically conscious in my position and use my platform to ensure that all students, in particular those who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, feel and know they belong. I will work more to remove any barriers, and as many as I can. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks. I'll turn it back over to Meryl.
So I don't think Jeff was able to make it back in, so I'm going to try to share what he had planned to say this evening. So he started with this quote here from a DDSB at home grade 8 student. "My virtual classroom is ideal. My teacher gives us the time to learn about how racism exists and why we must act. We learn about ourselves and each other. I contribute by giving my opinions, and I am valued." The DDSB at home grade 7 and 8 and grade 4 to 8 gifted campus is committed to equity and identifying, addressing, and eliminating anti-Black racism. And this quote that you see and that you've just heard captures how many of our students have been feeling, or sorry, how our students have been feeling throughout this journey. Our campus consists of 93 homerooms and close to 3,000 students. Our campus equity focus on student identity and addressing anti-Black racism is strongly supported by the opportunity to work with Dr. Nicole West-Burns and the DDSB equity team. We surveyed our students and teachers in December. There were 2 main cohort groups that were surveyed: those who were with DDSB at home from the start in September and received the full training, and those who came later as part of the November transfer when we gained many new classrooms. For the most part, the results indicated no significant difference between cohorts, except for the 3 questions that related directly to the professional development opportunity with Dr. West-Burns. When it comes to 74%, when it comes to opportunities to learn about issues of race, 74% of the students of our September cohort feel that there are opportunities to learn about issues of race, compared to only 50% of students in the cohort that came in November, which is a 24% difference. When it comes to opportunities to explore topics of social justice, 68% of the students of our September cohort feel that there are opportunities to explore topics of social justice, compared to only 53% of students in the cohort that came after, a 15% difference. And finally, when it comes to opportunities to read materials that challenge stereotypes, 65% of the students of our September cohort feel that they have had opportunities to read materials that challenge stereotypes, compared to only 52% of students in the cohort that came in November, a 13% difference. This professional learning is making a difference. Finally, teachers are also reporting that they now reconsider the texts and stories in the classroom that disrupt anti-Black racism and challenge stereotypes. They bring anti-Black racism work to a Canadian context. It is new learning due to the familiarity with the American context, and makes it even more relevant as it is closer to home, which engages students. They are also reflecting upon themselves and their own unconscious bias and moving forward. And it's pushing them to consider their role as a white educator in a profession largely dominated by white educators. And they are realizing who their students are and who their students see in school matters. The educator identity affects their students, and they need to be sure that it affects them positively and they are not reproducing and passing on their own bias. Finally, the leadership impact. This opportunity to work with Dr. West-Burns has affected the admin team by furthered leadership abilities to demonstrate vulnerability and discomfort with new learning, two necessary ingredients needed to lead anti-racism work in our schools, and we are learning alongside our educators, having discomfort and supporting them throughout while we also engage in the work.
In closing, we leave you with this quote: educational equity means that each child receives what he or she needs to develop his or her full academic and social potential.
Chair Morton, we thought it was important to share a very concrete example of some of the work that we're doing on the same evening that we provided the census data, just so that there's a deeper understanding of one slice of the work in terms of creating change within the district.
Thank you. So this ends our presentation, and we are pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
I'm looking at your conclusion on page 55, and you say the Equity Department will continue to work with and train all stakeholders to ensure equitable outcomes for all students and increase an understanding of the impact of anti-Black racism. I can tell you that everybody sitting around our board table will do everything in our power to support you in this endeavor. Thank you very much. I see Trustee Lundquist with her hand up.
I just wanted to say thank you because I actually found this helpful in terms of understanding the way the work is rolling out. So I actually appreciate this right behind the other one. And I did need to acknowledge the segment on white fragility because it's such a tense topic for people. So I think it's actually bold and brave to put it forward. And I'm delighted to see that people are engaging with what is a tough thing, frankly, that makes them naturally defensive. So I thank you for bringing that tonight. And although I have read it once, I will read it again because it's always good to be reminded of our own limitations. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And another very strong team effort. So to Superintendents Hamid and Lazarus, a great big thank you from all of us. Moving on, we are looking for a report from the Committee of the Whole in camera.
Yes, the board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows. The disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or a committee, an employee prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian, staff position and external committee member. We are pleased to welcome Olafunke Majebi to the Durham District School Board Audit Committee. Also decisions in respect of negotiations with employees of the board. Chair Morton, this is my report.
Thank you for that report. Do we need a motion to accept that report? Maybe somebody could help me with that.
It does need to be passed by the board, Chair Morton.
Thank you. Then I need a motion. And Trustee Thatcher, I'm suggesting that you would put forward that motion.
I'll put that motion forward, yes.
Could we have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you kindly. Moving on, good news from the system. We need to hear good news. Director Marsh, I know you've got lots of good news for us.
Thank you, Chair Morton. Before I turn it over to our student narrators for this month's update in terms of good news across the Durham District School Board, did want to flag that next week we have some good news in terms of engagement and participation. We have over 700 families registered for our parental engagement learning evening, which is entitled How to Talk to Your Children About Anti-Black Racism. It's occurring on February 24th, and it is proving to be one of our most popular parent engagement evenings thus far. So really happy about that. And now going to turn it over to the video and our student narrators. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system.
Dunbarton High School welcomed 2 Indigenous scholars, Wilfred Buck and Dr. Juan Carlos Chavez, to speak virtually to grade 9 students in January. Buck is an elder who is known as one of the foremost Indigenous star story experts in the world. Chavez is the director for NASA's STEM initiatives for the Northwest Earth and Space Sciences Pipeline Project.
The City of Pickering provided an environmental schools grant above the $4,000 in 2020 for Pickering schools to create pollinator gardens, plant trees, shrubs, and other vegetation native to Ontario. The amazing projects completed by staff and students will help sustain local and healthy ecosystems for years to come.
DDSB secondary schools and students are taking to social media to celebrate Black History Month through a high school Black Excellence campaign. Staff and students are participating by using hashtag Black Excellence DDSB to participate in a social media campaign on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The campaign features videos, pictures, poetry, and art showcasing Black excellence.
Coronation Public School invited Dr. Nicole West Burns to analyze their anti-Black racism plan to offer suggestions to the school moving forward. The school is dedicated to ensuring a safe, welcoming space for Black students and community and continues to work moving forward to address anti-Black racism on all school levels.
Recently, Bolton C. Falby Public School hosted Durham's first ever virtual Special Olympics Sport Festival. Students from Durham to Peterborough participated in various physical activities throughout the day at their school while maintaining physical distancing. 13 schools, 16 classrooms, and 122 students in total took part in the event. All students earned a certificate to show their achievement.
The DDSB Special Education Advisory Committee hosted a virtual session called The Edge of Compassion, Tools to Manage Caregiver Fatigue through a partnership with the Tend Academy. Presenters from the Tend Academy and members of the SEAC guided discussion of strategies for self-care, how to navigate caregiving during the pandemic, and tailoring well-being tips for oneself.
Since the beginning of January, the DDSB Make a Difference team has provided grocery gift cards, essential food, clothing, and school supplies to DDSB families across the region. So far, they have mailed $4,525 in gift cards to 160 secondary students, mailed $3,000 in gift cards to 119 elementary students, delivered $2,500 worth of school supplies, toiletries, food, and winter clothing to 7 families with children and youth of varying ages. Helping families is made possible thanks to the ongoing Make a Difference Students in Need fundraising campaign and funding through the Durham Child Nutrition Project.
Alumnus Jeff Mitsu and current R.S. McLaughlin CVI visual arts teacher Jake Stevens developed a friendship when they attended Pickering High School. Jeff has cerebral palsy and graduated in 2008. With Jake's help and Jeff's beautiful artwork, they now have over 1 million followers on TikTok. Great job, guys.
As students, we are excited to be a part of DDSB's Ignite learning culture and celebrating the excellence of the system.
As you can see, the dates of significance take us to the end of March.
Thank you to Elijah and Malia from Ajax High School for reading this month's good news.
That was good news, and students are always welcome to join us at board meetings. Further comments or questions? Trustee Edwards.
Just a question on how do we come up with the days? Because I see this, and I think every year I mention it, but we come up with celebration of days. And I always know there's autism awareness that happens in October. There's also World Autism Day that's in April. They always get mentioned. But I'm just wondering when it comes to other awareness, as far as, you know, epilepsy is March, as well as World Down Syndrome Day is March 21st. I'm just wondering, how do we come up with those dates?
Go ahead, Director Marsh.
Sorry, thank you, through you, Chair Morton. I'm actually going to call on a member of the team because I believe that it's an interdisciplinary approach in terms of navigating the days of that are coming up. And Superintendent Hamid, I think you perhaps play a part in it, and I think Executive Officer Surjanic may play another part in it. So may I call on you to start, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I did receive a little bit of lag in that. So can I ask Trustee Edwards if you could repeat the question?
I was wondering how we come up with the dates, awareness dates that we come up at the end as far as the presentations, because I know that we have, it comes up, it always comes up with the autism awareness, the autism awareness day in April, or the month in October, because that's on October. But I mean, March is also epilepsy month, awareness month, as well as March 21st is during Down Syndrome Day. So I'm just wondering, how do we come up with those dates?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So we engage with certain criteria for days. There's about 600 days over the course of the year, as you can imagine. So trying to continue to expand our knowledge is almost a full-time job. But we typically have tiers of days that we use, whether they're nationally recognized days, they're days that are days recognized either provincially, nationally, or locally. So those days are on our calendar, as you said, but if there are days, because there always are days, such as the ones that you may have mentioned that we don't have in those, then what we then do is we expand our 600 list. But there is a core list that we access, if that helps answer your question, Trustee Edwards, in terms of giving us just the foundation. And then from there, we tier them based on recognition, whether it's nationally, provincially, or locally.
It just, if we're talking about including everybody and what our makeup of our students are, if we recognize one disability, one culture, we really should be recognizing, you know, we're talking about inclusion, we should be too. And that's just my comment. Thanks.
I'm assuming that no other explanation is required. Thank you. Great news, and we applaud you. Moving on, we have some recommended actions. The first one, I'm going to go to Associate Director David Wright. He will talk about our preliminary budget planning. Associate Director Wright.
Thank you, Chair Morton. Good evening, everyone. Really happy to bring this report to you along with Senior Finance Manager Jennifer Machen this evening. The report before you highlights a suggested schedule of meeting dates and a set of guiding principles. The schedule of meetings will support transparency and stakeholder feedback throughout the budget process. The dates reflect what would be considered a quote unquote normal timeline based on our understanding that it is the intention of the Ministry of Education to provide budget related information as soon as possible. So we will adapt where required, but with the intention of having the budget approved and submitted to the Ministry of Education by the end of June. The guiding principles highlighted in the appendix will inform decision-making as we move through the process. These principles highlight student-centered decision-making, support for the board's strategic plan, a commitment to equity and human rights for students and staff, involving stakeholders in a collaborative budget process, as well, of course, as fiscally responsible decision-making. There is a recommendation in the report for you this evening to approve the schedule of meeting dates. And through you, Chair, Jennifer and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions? I do want to thank you for providing us with those guiding principles, because if you hadn't talked about them, I was going to bring them to the public's attention because I think they are extremely important. Seeing no questions, I'm going to the recommendation. And again, I will repeat it. It says, it is recommended that the Board of Trustees approve the 2021-2022 meeting schedule for the Education Finance Committee. Could I have somebody move that motion? Thank you, Trustee Edwards, seconded by Trustee Lundquist. Any questions? We will then vote on that. I am suggesting that you go to reactions at the bottom of the screen. If you are, we can use the red X or the green check mark. So if you are in favor of that motion, please indicate by that green check mark. Thank you. If you are opposed, please indicate by using that red X. Thank you. That motion then has passed. And we will have that schedule. Our first meeting is Wednesday, March the 31st, and it is a public meeting. Thank you kindly. Moving on to a school year calendar update. Acting Associate Director Jim Markowski, over to you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton, the report this evening is on page 60 of the package. The purpose of the report this evening is to seek approval from trustees of the proposed consultative process for stakeholder input of the draft school year calendars for the 21-22 school year. The 4 proposed calendars, which include elementary regular and modified, along with secondary regular and modified, have been provided as appendices to the report and are in alignment to Regulation 304. The consultative process outline includes an online survey tool where input will be gathered from individual schools through school community councils, parent groups, and school staff. We will also seek input from our union partners and consult with the Durham Catholic District School Board to ensure that our calendars are matched as closely as possible. I do want to note that we're still awaiting a memorandum from the Ministry of Education that will provide further guidance on school year calendars, and if required, amendments will be made to the proposed calendars to ensure that there's alignment to ministry expectations. A final board report will be presented to trustees for approval that will reflect any updates from the consultative process and the ministry memo before the school year calendars are officially submitted to the ministry. That is my report. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions regarding our school calendar? We have a recommendation in front of us on page 62. The recommendation reads as this. This report seeks the recommendation of trustees to approve the draft school year calendars for 2021-2022 to be distributed for stakeholder feedback. A final board report, which includes the results of the consultation, will be shared with trustees for approval of the final school year calendars for 2021-22 prior to submission to the Ministry of Education. Could I have someone put forward that motion? Thank you, Trustee Barnes, seconded by Trustee Templeton. Comments, questions? Seeing none, then again, I'm going to ask you to vote using that green check mark if you are supporting this motion. Thank you. And a red X if you are opposing this motion. This motion has passed. Thank you kindly. Moving on to the last recommended action, And that is going to standing committee meeting from February the 1st. And I'm going to call on trustee Christine Thatcher.
Thank you, Chair Morton. At the standing committee meeting of February 1st, there were two motions that were brought forward. As the chair of the standing committee, I'm going to be bringing those forward one at a time tonight, Chair Morton. So the first one, I move that the board direct the Director of Education to bring forward a proposed revised draft policy on the naming and renaming of schools to the board meeting in March 2021. And that a committee be struck that includes 3 trustees from different municipalities to put input into the policy before the policy comes before the standing committee.
Could I ask you for clarification regarding the standing committee of which month?
This would be March the 1st, 2021, Chair.
So to that motion at the very end, we could just add on March the 1st for clarification purposes?
Yes.
Thank you. Comments? We have a motion on the floor. Could I have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Questions? Trustee Crawford, do you have a question? Or are you signaling your support?
I'm signaling my support.
Thank you. I am asking everyone then to signal your support of that motion by that green check mark again. Those who are opposed, could you indicate with that red X? That motion has passed. Thank you. I will go to trustee.
If I could for one moment.
Certainly.
Could we just, not at this point, but could we just have clarification of those minutes of that February the 1st meeting? It would be my recollection that there was, I just want to make sure that the actual mover was correct on that one. I'm just a little confused on that. Not here, we won't delay it, but maybe just go back and just reaffirm the mover of that motion. Thanks. The motion's correct. The motion's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Originally, I had brought it to the standing committee.
That is correct, but I believe that I introduced it as a motion, and I believe that it's incorrect. And it might have been Trustee Lundquist as well. I'm not exactly sure, but I know that we usurped your motion, Chair Morton, and made amendments to it. So I just want to make sure it's correct. I think it's incorrect. The motion is correct, though, so it's all good from a governance standpoint.
That's the most important thing, and thank you for drawing that to our attention. Going back to Trustee Thatcher, I think you have a second recommended action.
Yes, I do, Chair. I move that the chair write a letter to Metrolink to express the board's concerns with respect to the proposed route and other concerns related to the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit Project, with a copy to the Regional Municipality of Durham, impacted municipalities, the Minister of Seniors and Accessibility, local MPPs, Durham Student Transportation Service, and Durham Catholic District School Board.
Thank you for that motion. I am looking for somebody to second that motion. Trustee Lundquist, are there questions or comments? Seeing none, going back to our reactions, the green check mark will indicate to us that you are supporting that motion. Thank you. And a red check mark for anyone who would oppose that motion. That motion is carried. We will be writing a letter to this effect. Are there any other comments, Trustee Thatcher?
Nope, nothing more from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you kindly. Moving on, we have some information items. The first one, we're going to hear about the SEAC meeting. So I'm going to go to Trustee Edwards.
The minutes of the December 17th SEAC meeting can be found on starting on page 76. I just want to bring forward some of the conversation for awareness and that around concerns, particularly around e-learning and some of the materials that are available through TBO and e-learning with the Ministry of Education around accessibility. In that, the materials available through TBO and even some of the ministry e-learnings courses that have been created are not necessarily accessible and meet some of the standards. And I can give you some of the examples where, I don't know if everybody remembered that commercial where you basically can hear water running and et cetera, whatever, and you kind of think you're in a tropical forest, but then they show the picture and it's actually a kitchen with the parrot and running water, et cetera. It would help if there was distributed video. And that's the thing, is that some of the materials that, and even when teachers are instructing and they say things, people don't always use closed captioning is great, but it doesn't describe an image in behind. So, I mean, there's some huge concerns around that, as well as there's concerns around bright space and its ability to be fully accessible to all students. So the SEAC is looking at writing a letter to the Ministry of Education expressing those concerns, especially since the increased mandate of TBO and TFO, but they really are concerned about basically who's writing the curriculum or who's writing the material and ensuring that they're accessible. And that's my report. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments? Thank you, Trustee Edwards, for that report. We're going to learn about the OPSPA report. We'll go to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I have a brief report tonight. The PES Public Education Symposium was January 23rd to the 25th. We had quite a few of our trustees participate, which was fantastic. A lot of the themes were around around equity, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism as well. And we got a chance to hear from students and how our education system are impacting them through some of those pieces. OPSA also held its second speaker series on February 11th. The presentation was by Dr. Haley Hamilton, and this topic she spoke on was mental health among students and adults and how they're doing. The recorded session can be accessed on the OPSPA website for trustees that didn't get a chance to participate. There'll be another session Thursday, February 25th, with Matthew R. Morris. And that's available for trustees. It's free, and it's just a matter of logging in to participate. OPSPA has forwarded to the ministry their consultation paper on the GSN funding for 2021 and 2022, highlighting issues and concerns that trustees have brought forward in regards to how the monies are allocated within our funding. And as well, they're also struck a working group in regards to looking at education as it stands and how it will what it will look like after COVID. So that is my report. Thank you.
And I'm sure that you're willing to take questions if anyone has one.
Yes. Oh, another reminder that we have a meeting on the 20th for trustees. Central East, Donna?
Yes, there is a Central East meeting on this Saturday coming up from 9 to 11. It's a very busy and packed meeting with looking for a lot of input from members. Thanks.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I see no other business. I want to thank everyone for your level of engagement tonight and consider this meeting adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Right, thank you.
Good night.
Well, thank you guys for having me on tonight.
Thank you.